Somebody is lying, Higgins.
Stalin's for Hitler, Stalin's against Hitler.
Well, what I want, there's a wonderful saying by Walt Whitman that you should loaf and invite your soul.
He was once the golden face of Hollywood, the epitome of masculine elegance, a dazzling talent on the silver screen, and the soul of an entire generation of cinema. For more than 6 decades, Robert Redford not only brought audiences unforgettable roles and Oscar statuettes, but also planted in their hearts the belief that a gentleman could be both captivating and honorable while carrying a sense of social responsibility. Yet behind the spotlight lay a life marked by tragedy. He lost a child at a young age, faced silent battles with illness, and lived with the fear that one day people would remember only the face on the screen, forgetting the wounded man within. That is why, when news broke that Redford had taken his final breath at 89 in the wooden home he cherished in Utah, the world was both moved and heartbroken. People believed he had found a peaceful ending, slipping away in his sleep after a lifetime of devotion. But the truth was far from simple. Within hours, everything collapsed. Leaked autopsy documents tore apart that serene illusion. They revealed a very different Redford. Years of struggle with chronic disease, a body covered in scars, a large, suspicious bruise, and cold, ambiguous notes in the forensic files. What seemed like routine medical paperwork unfolded instead like a final diary, a place where he silently left behind secrets never meant for the public eye. And those very pages shattered the image of a peaceful death, exposing a darkness so unsettling it left all of Hollywood stunned. Yet before the secrets of the autopsy report gradually came to light, the entire world of cinema was wrapped in boundless mourning. Millions of hearts rose in unison to remember him, turning Redford's death into a global event at once haunting and sacred. The New York Times published a nearly 5,000-word obituary, as long as an academic essay, calling him one of the last pillars of classic Hollywood, placing Redford alongside immortal icons like Paul Newman and Gregory Peck. The Los Angeles Times described him as the Utah gentleman with the eternal smile, highlighting not only the image of a captivating leading man, but also of someone bound for life to Utah's mountains and forests, where he built the Sundance legacy. The Guardian launched a special section, reprinting interviews from the 1970s when Redford had just reached his peak, so that today's public could rediscover a man both forthright and deeply thoughtful. In France, Le Monde compared him to the heartbeat of independent cinema, for without Redford, there would have been no Sundance rising to global stature. Nikkei Asia called him the bridge between Hollywood and the world, an artist who turned American cinema into a common language of humanity. On television, grief filled the airwaves. CNN, BBC, Sky News, and CBS simultaneously replayed his masterpieces. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with that defiant gaze, The Sting with the roguish smile, and All the President's Men, the film that made Redford a symbol of courage, of a free press, and of civic spirit. These films were not only cinematic works, but fragments of memory, reviving a golden age. Within a single day, the keyword Robert Redford became a global trend with over 20 million searches, a record-breaking figure even for a film legend. On social media, people shared images of a young Redford with radiant blue eyes, film scenes etched into collective memory, and countless tributes. Across the arts, from veteran directors in Hollywood to young filmmakers in Asia and Europe, voices of mourning rose together. It was not merely the loss of one man, but a moment when the world realized an entire chapter of film history had closed. That evening, Jane Fonda wept during a live interview. "I can't stop crying. Robert was beautiful in every sense, an American icon we must cherish." Dozens of newspapers quoted her words as Hollywood's collective cry. The next day, at a New York film premiere, Meryl Streep spoke only one line before the cameras. "One of the last lions has fallen." When replayed on CBS Evening News, the room fell into silence. The Guardian gave live coverage of the worldwide tributes, from young directors nurtured at Sundance to veteran stars. Quentin Tarantino wrote on Instagram, "Without him, there would be no Reservoir Dogs. I owe him my entire career." At the same time, Sundance Film Festival's official account declared solemnly, "He spent his life opening doors for dreams. We will continue walking the path he laid down." Not only that, Martin Scorsese called Redford the keeper of standards for an entire generation of filmmakers. Steven Spielberg recalled with emotion, "Robert made me believe cinema could be both art and social responsibility." Francis Ford Coppola, in a letter to the press, wrote, "He was a rare gentleman, both romantic and steadfast, a friend and colleague I will always respect." Leonardo DiCaprio posted on Twitter, "Sundance changed my life, and Redford was its soul. I will forever be in his debt." Brad Pitt wrote simply, "A monument has fallen, but his mark will live on in every frame." Kate Blanchett called Redford a patron of new voices who kept cinema endlessly reborn. Even Barack Obama spoke out. Robert was not only a screen legend, he was someone who used art to advance justice and protect this planet. Barbra Streisand, his co-star in The Way We Were, wrote movingly, "Robert was always my greatest partner on screen, a gentleman both in film and in life. I will always be grateful we shared the most beautiful years together." Ron Howard called Redford a rare cultural icon, someone who defined what it meant to be a star while also shaping the future of independent cinema. Dustin Hoffman, his companion in All the President's Men, remembered, "Working with him was the greatest honor of my career. Robert brought authenticity and humanity to every scene." Author Stephen King posted on X. No one can deny that Redford was the golden face of Hollywood in the 70s and 80s. He is an unforgettable memory. Coleman Domingo, a star of a younger generation, also shared, "My peers and I will forever be shaped by the legacy he left. Robert proved that kindness itself can be the greatest power." Meanwhile, American media estimated Redford's fortune at over $200 million, including a vast Utah ranch, a Sundance log mansion, as well as film royalties and stakes in the Sundance Film Festival. Yet above all, it was his spiritual legacy that shook the world. Unforgettable roles, Oscar statuettes, and an independent stage that nurtured a new generation of filmmakers. Even so, amid the storm of tributes, an emptiness lingered. The Redford family never once mentioned the cause of death, firmly keeping it secret. That very silence fueled public imagination. On Twitter and Facebook, countless theories spread, from true physical decline to concealed medical details. Within a day, the phrase Redford Autopsy Report climbed to the #1 global trend, a bitter paradox. Redford was mourned more deeply than ever, but at the same time, millions yearned to know the truth about his final years. It felt like a prolonged silence, as if everyone were asking, how did Robert Redford truly face death, alone in the room where the lights of the stage had gone out? From that moment, the search for unusual signs in his last days officially began, where a farewell written in quiet concealment hid secrets powerful enough to make anyone shudder. The pages of the report did not merely list illnesses. They painted the portrait of a body that had fought to the very end. Right at the beginning, a cold line read, "From March 2018, Robert Redford was diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, after collapsing from shortness of breath during a charity gala." That image, a Hollywood legend who once strode powerfully across the red carpet, now gasping for help in the middle of a crowd, was the first sign of tragedy. COPD is often the disease of longtime smokers, and Redford, ironically, was once hailed by the press in the 1960s as the gentleman with a careless cigarette on his lips. a detail that helped forge his roguish allure, but would become the fatal imprint etched deep into his lungs. He quit smoking in the late 1990s, but it was too late. The damage had already sunk in, eating away at his breath until the very end. From 2019, Redford was forced to live with a personal oxygen tank, strapping himself each night to a breathing machine. To the public, he still kept his radiant smile in interviews, still appeared on the Sundance stage to introduce young talents, still took part in environmental projects, as if his health was never a burden. But in the shadows, there were nights when the whirring of the ventilator drowned out his frail breaths, like a tragic soundtrack to an artist's life. The forensic report noted that in just 5 years, he had been hospitalized at least 27 times for respiratory failure. Treatment costs reached $1.2 million, an enormous sum, yet never disclosed. For Redford, proud as the roles that defined his career, never wanted the public to witness his collapse. But the lungs were not all. His heart, too, was under siege. The report documented 3 heart attacks. The first in the summer of 2021, then again in 2023 and early 2024. And yet, even as his heart bore scars like invisible knife wounds, Redford still managed to direct a small documentary, still sent messages to Sundance organizers, still took part in campaigns to protect the environment. Doctors advised placing stents to prolong his life. But Redford refused. He chose medication, chose to face the pain with grit, the same way he once stood firm on film sets, enduring everything to finish the scene, to keep the lights from going out before the final cut. One of the most haunting details in the file took place in what should have been the most peaceful setting: dinner in the wooden farmhouse at his Utah ranch. Amid the warmth of family, with forks gently tapping plates and voices murmuring stories, Redford suddenly froze. His hand trembled, then clutched his chest. His face, already gaunt, turned paler still, his lips pressing tight as if to keep the pain from spreading. His daughter, sitting across, panicked, leapt to her feet and grabbed his hand. "Dad, what's wrong?" her voice trembling. But Redford, instead of admitting the truth, lifted the corners of his mouth in a faint smile. He whispered, "Maybe the food's just a bit too salty." A weightless remark, yet his glistening eyes betrayed a secret his body could no longer hide. Then, like the seasoned actor he was on the very stage of his own life, he forced his hand back onto the table, straightened his posture, and resumed the half-told story of a memory long past. His voice was slow, low, but he still tried to mask his labored breathing. In that moment, no one in the family dared to interrupt. They looked at him with both tenderness and helplessness, while Redford, as he had so many times before, insisted on being the father, the pillar, not the patient in collapse. In 2023, the signs of exhaustion were etched into every feature. Within a single year, Robert Redford lost nearly 15 kilograms. His cheeks sank, his bones protruded, leaving many stunned, unable to recognize the gentleman who had once captivated the world. Clothes that once fit perfectly now hung loosely, and his steps had grown slow, heavy, as if each movement had to be bartered with a breath. And yet, in early 2024, Redford still forced himself to appear at the Sundance Film Festival, the place he considered his spiritual child and his greatest legacy beyond the screen. No one believed he had the strength left, but he came. The image of Redford, his face pale, lips bluish, yet still trying to hold a faint smile, supported by 2 aides as he moved step by step across the red carpet, brought the entire hall to silence. It was not a mere farewell appearance. It was the final act of an artist, stepping into the light, standing before his audience, to prove that he still could, if only for a fleeting moment. On the live broadcast, journalist Ann Thompson of IndieWire said through tears, he didn't come to say goodbye. He came to prove he could still stand tall even when his body had collapsed. Those words instantly became an unofficial eulogy, engraving Redford's final tragic moment into the hearts of millions. And indeed, that was the last time the public saw him in the flesh, under the lights, wearing a fragile yet unyielding smile. By 2025, everything had grown heavier. Redford was almost bound to his wheelchair, no longer able to leave his bed without assistance. Nurses stood watch day and night, recording each bout of breathlessness, every irregular heartbeat. Medical expenses soared to $2.5 million, a number that reflected the brutal decline of a body once radiant as an icon. Yet it was precisely in this most fragile stage that his unyielding pride shone through. A Redford who still chose to face the light, even as darkness closed in. The toxicology section of the report revealed a shocking truth. Robert Redford's blood contained unusually high levels of morphine and benzodiazepines. These substances were not the direct cause of death, but they said everything. That in his final years, he had been forced to rely on painkillers and sedatives just to survive each day. Behind the smile on screen, behind the slow but dignified walk on the red carpet, was a body straining under an unwanted dependence on medication. Not for pleasure, but simply to dull the relentless pain tearing through every fiber of his being. A medical source told NBC News that Redford once confided to his private doctor, "I am not afraid of death. I am only afraid of waking up each morning to begin another day of fighting pain." That quiet admission, spoken in the stillness of a hospital room, was nothing less than a spiritual testament. It revealed that he was not only a legendary artist, but also a man trapped in the merciless grip of illness, where each new day was not a gift, but a battle. The report also listed other injuries, as if mapping a body that had become a battlefield of surgeries. A long scar from skin cancer surgery in 2015, an artificial knee from a 2019 operation that left behind a chronic infection that never healed, and bed sores on his back. Signs of being bedridden for too long. Together, they formed a harrowing image of a man who had once stood at the pinnacle of glory. But by early 2025, no longer had the strength to leave his sick room, where sunlight reached him only through a window. Yet the detail that most unsettled the public was not found in the medical notes. It was a large bruise, stark across his left rib cage. It matched none of Redford's known conditions, nor any of the documented injuries. The forensic doctor wrote only a few terse words, "Possibly from impact," then left it at that, without further explanation. That bruise, an unsolved riddle, left the public wondering. Had Redford collapsed in his wooden home in an accident never disclosed? Or was it a secret deliberately kept hidden by his family and the forensic team? Some believe the family wanted to protect his reputation, while other whispers suggested that sensitive details had been deliberately concealed. All of it overlapped, turning the report into a record both chilling and contradictory. On one side, the elegant gentleman immortalized in public memory. On the other, an aging body covered in scars and filled with secrets that may never be solved. It was precisely these gaps that fueled countless theories. How did Robert Redford truly pass away? Did he simply drift into eternal sleep? Or was there something else hidden behind the closed door of his wooden home in Utah? The cold words of the report cut into the public's memory like blades, leaving family, colleagues, and even close friends unable to remain silent. They were forced to speak, both to express grief and to fill the void left by those shocking revelations. The Redford family released a brief statement from the Sundance cabin. He had passed away in his sleep, in the place he loved most, surrounded by family. Not a word about illness, no mention of medical records, only a plea for the public to respect their privacy in this time of mourning. Yet ironically, that very silence only stoked waves of curiosity and suspicion. In less than a day, more than 3,000 international articles appeared, each examining Redford from a different angle, making the image of a peaceful death ever more fragile, ever more breakable. In the final weeks of his life, Redford seemed to live as though he knew it all beforehand. Relatives recalled, every night he would wake at exactly 3 in the morning, like some strange biological clock. He would sit quietly by the window, his eyes fixed on the snow-covered Wasatch Range, the land he had called home for more than half a century. That image was haunting. A legend who once lit up all of Hollywood, now retreating into silence, as if conversing with the night and preparing for his final journey. The private nurse recalled a haunting memory. Robert Redford sitting on his bed, trembling hands opening an old notebook, its edges worn as if it had followed him for half a century. Inside were densely written quotations from Hemingway and Thoreau. At times, in the quiet darkness, he would murmur softly, "I have gone far enough." Just a whisper, light as breath. Yet anyone who heard it shivered. It did not sound like a complaint, but like a signal, announcing that the journey had reached its final stretch. His health had declined to the point of near confinement to bed, yet Redford still held onto an iron will. When a major New York television network proposed a special tribute interview, he turned to his daughter, his voice fragile but firm. "I don't want people's pity. I want them to remember me at Sundance under the sunlight." That sentence left the entire family speechless. They understood he was not only accepting death, he was directing the final scene of his life, staging its ending like a filmmaker. That night, Utah was struck by an unseasonal rain. The housekeeper recounted how Redford wept at the sound of raindrops tapping against the wooden roof. Overcome with emotion, he spoke of Scott, the son he lost in 1985 to heart complications. For years, the pain had seemed buried, but now it burst open, bleeding as if it had happened yesterday. He whispered, "I'm coming to see you soon." That tear was not only longing, but also a vow, a promise reaching across the boundary of life and death. Just a few days earlier, Redford had forced himself to visit a small church in Provo. He sat quietly in the last pew, head bowed, hands resting on a Bible. An old friend who accompanied him recalled, he closed his eyes, then said quietly, "Last night I saw Paul. He smiled and told me not to worry anymore." The name Paul Newman, co-star, soulmate, the partner who had lit up Hollywood's most glorious years, uttered in that sacred space, sent chills through everyone present. Many claimed it was only a hallucination brought on by pain medication, but others were certain it was a sign. Newman was calling his friend to the other side. Throughout the 1970s, Hollywood buzzed with rumors of a bond between Redford and Newman that went beyond friendship. They never confirmed it, but their silence only fanned the flames of speculation. And when Redford whispered, "I saw Paul," many believed it was a final confession, tender yet haunting, impossible to forget. After his death, in the Sundance cabin, the place that had cradled both his career and his soul, the family discovered a small slip of paper, still carrying the scent of ink, not yet dry. It lay quietly on his desk, amid piles of old books and faded family photographs. The handwriting was shaky, jagged as if stirred by the wind, clearly written in his final days when his hand had grown weak. "Don't remember me for the roles. Remember me for having dared to live truthfully for many relatives." It was a message to his children, a reminder that the greatest legacy he left behind was not cinematic glory, but the courage to live true to oneself. But to those closer to him, those who had sensed the mysterious silence between him and Paul Newman, that note carried a second meaning. It was not only for the family, but also an echoing message to Newman, the partner, the confidant who had departed this world in 2008. When one pieces together that note with those final private moments, the faraway gaze through the snow-framed window, the quiet tear during the unseasonal rain, the whispered name of Newman in the church, a strange portrait emerges. Redford did not resist death, nor beg for sympathy. He chose to face it with rare serenity, as if guided by intuition that on the other side awaited a reunion with those he loved most. It was this silent yet meaningful preparation that deepened the world's respect for him. People remembered Redford not only through Oscar statuettes, immortal films, or the Sundance Film Festival that reshaped independent cinema. They remembered him as a man who knew how to walk gracefully into the final moment of his life, leaving behind a legacy not only in art, but in the very way he embraced life's finitude. Robert Redford was not just a name. He was an entire chapter of Hollywood's history, a chapter where every page intertwined the glittering light of fame with the dark shadows of private tragedy. Born in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, Redford grew up as America was still struggling to regain its rhythm after the Great Depression. His family was working class. He was not raised in luxury, but came of age amid economic limits and the stern values of a post-Depression era. From an early age, Redford showed he was not destined for an easy road. He was expelled from the University of Colorado for drinking scandals, an early fall that sent him into years of drifting. With the meager money he earned washing dishes and waiting tables, Redford roamed across Europe, from Paris and Madrid to Florence. Those days, living in cheap rented rooms, drinking cheap wine, conversing with drifters and unknown artists, became his first vivid raw material, shaping a Redford who was both wild and heavy with longing. When he returned to America in the early 1960s, Redford did not follow the beaten path. He entered television programs as a fresh face, then quickly exploded with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. The film not only made him a global star, but also engraved the image of the Utah Gentleman, a title that the press and public would repeat for decades, tied to his refined presence, quiet composure, and piercing blue eyes. The peak of his career continued with The Sting, 1973, which established Redford as Hollywood's box office guarantee. For a time, it was said that simply hanging a poster with Redford's face outside a theater was enough to draw crowds, no matter what the film was about. He became a phenomenon, an icon of American masculine beauty during the golden age of cinema. But the spotlight was only half the story. Alongside success, Redford was drawn into rumors, scandals, and personal wounds that never fully healed. After the sudden death of his son Scott in the late 1960s, a shock that cut to the very roots of his heart, he lost his way. Local newspapers at the time described Redford as often appearing drunk in Malibu bars. One Los Angeles Times reporter once recorded a haunting scene. Redford sat motionless at the bar, his eyes bloodshot, as if carrying an invisible war within. Strangely, that article quickly vanished from circulation, as if erased by an invisible hand, but it left a lingering echo. From then on, for years, Hollywood buzzed with whispers of a Redford caught between two worlds. One side the spotlight of the stage, the other the darkness of alcohol, family grief, and private battles no one else could see. At that time, the entertainment world was shaken when Hollywood Confidential reported that Redford was having an affair with a young actress from the set of Jeremiah Johnson. It didn't stop at rumor. A leaked handwritten letter stirred the public even more. In it, one line read, "He is gentle, as if he wants to protect you. But he can also become cold to the point of cruelty." Those trembling words painted a contradictory portrait. A romantic gentleman admired worldwide, yet behind it lay a complexity in love that was hard to fathom. No evidence was ever confirmed, but Redford's absolute silence in the face of the rumor only deepened the belief that his private life was a labyrinth of contradictions, where tenderness and ruthlessness could exist side by side in the same man. Then came his directorial debut with Ordinary People, 1980, which stunned all of Hollywood. For his very first film, he walked straight onto the stage of glory, winning the Academy Award for Best Director. From that moment on, he was no longer just the handsome face on screen, but living proof that Redford was a complete artist. Yet from here, another side of his portrait began to emerge. Redford the perfectionist, to the point of obsession. Veteran journalist Peter Biskind once recounted that on set, an assistant was harshly scolded by Redford simply because a shadow was misaligned by a few centimeters. Such a trivial detail revealed how Redford saw art not as play, but as a battlefield where there was no room for error. Some admired him, calling him a solitary genius, a creative force impossible to reconcile with conventional standards. But others whispered that working with Redford was like living in a storm, tense, harsh, and exhausting. That rigor was not limited to art. Redford repeatedly stepped into the turbulent waters of politics. During the 1988 U.S. presidential election, conservatives accused him of secretly funding Earth First, a radical environmental group investigated by the FBI for sabotage. The Washington Post even reported that the FBI had opened a personal file on him. Redford never confirmed those allegations, but they were enough to cast him as a double-sided figure in the public eye. On one side, the star revered worldwide. On the other, a man suspected of ties to extremist movements. Above all scandals and controversies, Redford's greatest legacy remained the Sundance Film Festival. Few knew that in its early years of financial struggle, he had mortgaged his own log cabin in Utah to keep the event alive. That decision was not only a financial gamble, but a declaration. Redford was willing to risk his own security to open a door for dreams in cinema that had nowhere else to belong. From a modest event, Sundance gradually grew into the holy land of independent film. It was there that legendary names first emerged. Quentin Tarantino with Reservoir Dogs, a film that launched his violent and unique style. Steven Soderbergh with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which redefined American cinema in the 1990s. And Damien Chazelle with Whiplash, a project nurtured at Sundance that would go on to claim the Oscars. Variety once declared, without Sundance, American cinema would lose half of its creative soul. But Redford did not stop at cinema. He was also a powerful social voice, often turning his fame into a weapon against authority. When the U.S. government launched the Iraq War in 2003, Redford was one of the few stars to openly oppose it, a brave stance at a time when even Hollywood itself was divided. For decades, he steadfastly advocated for environmental protection, confronting giant energy corporations exploiting Utah's nature, the land he called his soul's home. In 2009, an oil industry leader sneered at him in the Washington Post as a dangerous romantic, but Redford did not back down. He continued funding conservation projects, from reforestation to protecting the Colorado River to climate change campaigns, insisting that artists were not born only to entertain, but to confront and reflect the hardest questions of their era. At one point, there were even calls for him to enter politics. In the 1980s, some Democratic allies seriously suggested Redford run for office. With his charisma, reputation, and intellect, many believed he could even reach the presidency. But Redford always refused. He only smiled, leaving behind a line quoted by generations. "I serve this country best through film, not through power." That refusal shaped a very different image of Redford compared to his contemporaries. While many artists sought to enter politics to consolidate influence, Redford chose another path: to make art his weapon, not to make power his throne. And perhaps it was precisely that choice that rendered his name immortal, not only as a movie star, but as a cultural figure of conscience. In contrast to the noise that surrounded him in public, Robert Redford's daily life was almost unbelievably simple. Locals in Utah recalled that throughout the 2010s, they often saw him in a small cafe in Salt Lake City. He would sit alone with a copy of the New York Times, sometimes sipping black coffee, sometimes lifting his head to nod and smile gently when recognized. No bodyguards, no luxury cars, no press swarm, just a very different Redford from the screen legend who once stirred the entire world. After announcing his retirement from acting in 2018, Redford devoted more time to a quiet life. He tended to his ranch in Utah, spent summers in his Sundance log cabin, a place filled with film memorabilia, and also the sanctuary of his soul. In the 2020s, as his health steadily declined, he still tried to attend a few Sundance Film Festival events, though his steps had grown slow and needed support. In early 2024, he made his final public appearance at the festival. His face was gaunt and pale, but that faint smile still lingered, moving many in the audience to tears. By 2025, Redford rarely left his home. He moved by wheelchair with nurses on duty around the clock. Neighbors remembered how in the mornings he would sit quietly by the wooden window, gazing at the snow-covered Wasatch Range, his blue eyes contemplative as if in conversation with the past. That was the final image of him in Utah's memory. Not a star, not an Oscar-winning director, but simply an old man living in absolute silence. Robert Redford closed his journey like a chapter of cinema history, both radiant and shadowed. He was the star who made audiences believe in the magic of the silver screen, the director who dared to dissect the hidden corners of humanity, the man who created a stage for countless generations of independent filmmakers. Yet alongside that brilliance were private tragedies, years tormented by illness, the grief of losing a child, and secrets he carried with him to the very end. Yet he departed, leaving behind not only a glorious artistic legacy, but also a vast fortune estimated at more than $200 million. But just like the complex roles he once portrayed on screen, Redford's death did not close with peace. It opened a new chapter, one of unanswered questions about who would truly inherit that wealth. Redford had 4 children, but 2 preceded him in death: Scott, who died as an infant, and James, who passed away in 2020 after years battling illness. His 2 surviving daughters, Shauna and Amy, together with 7 grandchildren, were his direct heirs. Alongside them was Sybil Sagars, his second wife, who had been by his side since 2009 and was believed to hold a central position in all financial decisions. But it was precisely this relationship that stirred controversy. Some sources claimed Sybil would inherit the majority of the estate, while others believed Redford had quietly established trusts for his children, grandchildren, and for the Sundance Institute, the organization he considered his spiritual child. Rumors grew louder when the press discovered that Redford had updated his will several times in his final years. The questions that swirled after Robert Redford's death were not only about his career or public image, but also about the massive fortune he left behind. Would it fall into the hands of his widow, Sybil Sagars, his companion in later years, or be divided among his 2 daughters and grandchildren? Or perhaps a significant portion would flow into Sundance, the spiritual child he had spent half a century building? And more importantly, might there still exist hidden investments or secret funds that Redford had discreetly safeguarded only to be revealed after his passing? These suspicions turned Redford's inheritance into a labyrinth of ambiguity. On one side, the light of remembrance; on the other, the shadows of silence and unresolved disputes. Hollywood mourned him as an immortal gentleman, but behind the velvet curtain, his family and charitable institutions may yet face a long legal battle to uncover the true answer to the question, what was Robert Redford's final will? His legacy, of course, lives on, in the Oscar statuettes, in the films now regarded as classics, in the mark left by the Sundance Film Festival that helped define the entire current of independent cinema. But the leaked Autopsy report, with its cold and unforgiving lines, cast an additional layer of gloom over that image, an immortal gentleman on screen, but also an aging body, scarred and frail, leaving this world amid countless unanswered questions. Perhaps it is precisely this paradox, between glory and darkness, between radiant legacy and hidden secrets, that has made Robert Redford a truly singular icon. A man whose story could not be ended even by death, but instead provoked an enduring, haunting curiosity. As if Hollywood still has an unfinished reel, a chapter never fully told.